It's time to have your say. Welcome back to the Q&A. Ask SCW will begin straight after this. John Cena is returning on WWE Raw in Laredo, Texas this coming Monday, the 27th of June, celebrating 20 years on our screens. It only felt appropriate for this Q&A this week to do a special John Cena edition of Ask SCW. Every question is going to be based on Big Match John, so get involved in the comments below of any of the topics that we discussed in today's video. Please like the video, share with a friend, subscribe as well, and we can't argue whether you're Let's Go Cena or Cena Sucks. John Cena has had a big influence in the last 20 years in WWE. We've got some fantastic questions lined up on today's show, including what will John Cena do on his return to Monday Night Raw, some of the highs in his career, what were the breakthrough moments we're going to be talking about, perhaps some of the missed opportunities as well, maybe some of the bad booking for John Cena, and of course talking about the potential 17th world title. But let's not waste any time and get in with our first question this week. And it comes from Paul at Laying SmackDown. With John Cena coming back on Monday, does he go after the 17th world title, or does he go after the IC title to complete his Grand Slam? He gets that Rick has already given his blessing for Cena to break his record. Brilliant question to kick things off this week. What will John Cena do on his return to Raw in Laredo, Texas this upcoming Monday? You'd think it would make sense for him to go for that 17th world title, but at this particular moment, we see that John's going to be on Raw. He's not going to be on SmackDown. So Roman predominantly can be on both shows, but he is on SmackDown when he does show up at the minute. He's only advertised to appear on the 25th of July edition of Monday Night Raw between now and SummerSlam. Of course, that is the Madison Square Garden edition. But at the same time, John Cena could call out Roman, but Roman is also tied up with Brock Lesnar. Of course, Brock made his return. That is going to be the SummerSlam main event, the last man standing match. Now, as much as I would be in favour of adding another name to their match to make a triple threat, may freshen things up a little bit, I don't see that going down. It also rules out Gunther at this point. Again, it would complete the set to be the Grand Slam champion, go for the Intercontinental Championship, but, well, that's on SmackDown. We've got Raw, which is the United States Championship, and I think that could be the direction of where Cena's attention could be. Now, for me personally, there are a couple of ways that they could book this match. It could be simply that John Cena, seeing the great work that Theory is doing, perhaps wants the match with him, sees him as the star of the future, or it could be a case of that Theory wants to come out and get in John Cena's face. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that second option was the one that actually WWE chooses to go down. You can imagine, you know, all the smack talk going down, maybe going for the selfie with John Cena. John looking like perhaps he'll just smile for the selfie, play along, then hit an attitude adjustment afterwards, perhaps set up a match for SummerSlam. Or it could simply be that Theory takes out Cena, ruins the celebration. What better way to sort of build heat for the heel, the star of the future, and also then for Big Match John to actually come in and try and have that match at SummerSlam against Theory. I would not be surprised if that's the match they choose. As I said, Theory, many people see him as the next John Cena. A lot of comparisons have been made. You know, backstage, you know, WWE, they're very high on Theory. They see him as someone that could carry the company for years to come. Time is on his side. He's in his mid-20s. So I think that this is going to be the option that WWE chooses to go down. I certainly would not be against, perhaps, you know, against some of the legends, perhaps as well, have a big-time film match at SummerSlam as well. It's a big stadium they're going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. They're going to want to sell those tickets as well. So those things I would be in favour of. We mentioned the idea of the IC title earlier in this video. Perhaps John Cena just does a celebration now, comes back and sets up a match with Gunther later down the line. Would be fine with that. I'd want to see Cena versus Gunther at some point, but that's what I think will be going on with Raw. I expect as well a lot of video packages, perhaps maybe Cena's debut, you know, where he sort of says ruthless aggression, slaps Kurt Angle as the match, gets the appreciation with the Taker, maybe gets some video packages, some highlights maybe of winning the championship at WrestleMania 21, some of his greatest rivals, stuff like that to really build it up, and maybe then have Cena as the main event segment of the show. I think WWE, in my opinion, would be foolish to do anything different, because you know that Cena being there, knowing, waiting for him to come out, I think it will be a ratings pull and obviously an attendance pull for Raw this upcoming week. Next question comes from Maxwell J. Freeman. Do you think WWE should have John Cena beat Ric Flair's record and become a 17-time World Heavyweight Champion, but this time a heel John Cena, a throwback to his Thuganomics gimmick? I'd love to see a heel John Cena of this sort of star power, this super Cena that we've got. I think it would be a lot of fun. Obviously as well, the Thuganomics gimmick was a great throwback as well back in the day in the Ruthless Aggression. Personally though, for me, I don't see it in 2022 with those two things happening. Super Cena has been a babyface and I think now will be a babyface for life. But as for that 17th world title, I think it's still up for a massive debate if it will actually happen, because now John Cena, it's a part-time schedule that we're going to get at best. If Cena was to come and do it, it should be done on the biggest stage possible, which of course is a WrestleMania in my personal opinion. If you couldn't tie John Cena down, if the movie schedule is not, you know, there, then perhaps you could do it on a SummerSlam, I guess, maybe a Royal Rumble. But for me personally, I still think it could happen. Obviously, Ric Flair's ties with WWE, they've been cut for the time being. So if WWE wanted to break that record, it feels like now probably would be the time they would probably look to do it, perhaps in the next year or two. And you couldn't argue with the idea of John Cena being the one to become a 17-time world champion. He has the current record alongside Ric Flair, both being 16-time world champions, and of course John Cena is a 16-time WWE champion in some format, whether it's World Heavyweight Champion or WWE Champion. You know, Ric Flair, 14 of those it was involving with the National Wrestling Alliance, and of course WCW. Of course, he's only a 2-time WWE champion, so you know, for me, okay, you can bundle it all together with wrestling history, but John Cena would be the one in WWE terms to do and break that record. And like I said earlier in the video, whether you're Let's Go Cena or Cena sucks, there's no argument that the industry has changed with John Cena so much. He's carried the mantelpiece on his back for like nearly 20 odd years. You know, he's still a big time deal. Even when he came back last summer for the Summer of Cena, he was like the biggest draw that WWE had at the time. So John Cena is a big name. You know, if you've been a fan for the last 20 years and wasn't a fan before that, no doubt he's on your Mount Rushmore of wrestlers in wrestling history. So for me, I think he'll be a prime candidate and to be the one to break that record and become a 17-time world champion. But for me, I do think if he was to do it, it would be a babyface moment, even though I do like the idea of the shock factor of a heel turn and bringing back that Thuganomics character. Next question comes from Martin Lorenzo Carrillo. What was in your mind one of the smartest things WWE ever did with John Cena during his entire career? We actually just mentioned it in the last question. I'd say the Thuganomics character probably was the smartest thing WWE ever did with John Cena in his entire career. And the reasoning for that is because when John Cena did originally debut, he was a guy that had, you know, multi different colored trunks each and every week. He didn't really have a character, had good matches, but they were finding it difficult to get him to break through and just not be another face on the brand. In fact, there was, if you go through the Ruthless Aggression documentary series on Peacock or the WWE Network, depending on where you're located, John Cena was almost fired back in 2002. There was almost a moment where they thought he wasn't going to quite make the cut. And then the Doctor of Thuganomics came in. He started rapping on the show. It was almost like, let's see how it will go. And it sort of gave John Cena personality, gave him charisma, gave him a chance to break through. And of course, each and every time he got on that mic, he shone, he stood out, he made each moment count. And you know, with these raps he was doing, everyone was on side. And it didn't just break him through to be someone on the roster, it actually took him to the top of the card, to where he eventually became a babyface, then became the challenger for the world title and winning it for the first time at WrestleMania 21 against JBL, which of course then led him to become the Super Cena, the top babyface John Cena that we got to know for the next 10, 15 years or so afterwards. But of course, without the Doctor of Thuganomics, we may have not got the John Cena career that we've had to see play out over the last 20 or so years. So for me, the Doctor of Thuganomics is probably the smartest move that was ever done for John Cena in his entire career. Noob and Cove, our next question now. What is 5 of John Cena's best feuds in the past 20 years? Brilliant question, this one, and so difficult to narrow this down to 5. You know, as I say, whether you love him or hate him, John Cena's had some great feuds over the last 20 years. So yeah, this has been quite difficult, and I'm going to give an honorary mention to something they just missed out on the top 5 for me, just purely because, well, John Cena knows how to play his role sometimes. It's not always the biggest feud, but you know, it just led to such heat on the night, and that's his feud with Rob Van Dam for One Night Stand in 2006. The fact, you know, with the, you know, Cena wins, we riot, just how Cena played himself, you know, going in there as a WWE guy in that hardcore ECW environment, for me was just something that I'll always remember. So that's an honorary shout, but it doesn't quite make my top 5, because top 5 feuds for me, well, starting off with this one, I'm going to go with Edge. I think Edge is, you know, him and Cena have had some great matches over the years. And obviously, when you look back to sort of TLC, obviously, that they did at Unforgiven 2006, you know, the attack of John Cena's father and stuff like that. For me, those two have been always parallels during the John Cena era. John Cena became world champion around the same time that Edge broke through as well. So they kind of have been synonymous with each other. Of course, Edge cashing in that Money in the Bank, being the first ever winner, first ever one to cash in on John Cena as well. So they've got a lot of history together. So definitely has to go down as one of John Cena's greatest rivals. And Randy Orton, I think, is another one, has to as well. Come on, how many matches have these guys had over the years? Crazy that none of them have been at a WrestleMania in a one-on-one environment. So there's still actually potential that he could do that match at some point in the future. I'm not sure how fans would react to it, but a feud that really started and took off properly from 2007, of course, where John Cena was injured, of course, before No Mercy 2007, had to vacate the championship. Randy Orton becoming the champion. Of course, we then got that famous John Cena return as the number 30 in the Madison Square Garden Royal Rumble in 2008. Fast forward it to 2009, of course, when Randy Orton was part of Legacy. Randy retained the championship at SummerSlam. I think it was Ted DiBiase's brother, if I'm not mistaken, was the cause of the distraction on that night. And of course, they had matches in Hell in a Cell. And of course, the famous I Quit match, of course, which I'm not mistaken was at Breaking Point as well. For me, that was quite a gruesome match at the time. Quite enjoyed that one. So yeah, for me, you know, you can even go to 2013 when WWE wanted to unify the championships, if you remember, at that point as well. Of course, they went with Randy Orton and John Cena as the two champions that went into that TLC match at the time. So these two have been heavy rivals for many, many years in WWE, perhaps to the point that perhaps people have got sick of it, but you can't argue Randy Orton is one of John Cena's greatest feuds. Personally, for me, a couple of favourite ones of mine has to be AJ Styles in 2016 and going into 2017 as well. The beat up John Cena, I loved all of that as well. The sort of dream match we never thought we'd get as well. And you know, AJ Styles was saying he was a better wrestler than John Cena. Even bring out a couple of 5-star classics out of these two was just awesome stuff to see. I really enjoyed the story as well of The Undertaker, of course, going to WrestleMania 34. Would John Cena get on the WrestleMania card? I just thought that was really well put together at the time. And of course, yeah, John Cena did get squashed in a couple of minutes, but it was the story to that match which made that, you know, that rivalry pretty good. And obviously, John Cena and Undertaker, they've had a few feuds over the years, of course, more down to the Thugonomics days, early doors. Of course, I think Vengeance 2003 is probably their highlighted match they had through that period, but I would go with the more recent feud from 2018, which was more of a personal favourite to mine. And of course, last but not least, has to be the pipe bomb, has to be CM Punk, that rivalry going into Money in the Bank. Like I said, there are times where John Cena knows to play his part as the villain. Just be the WWE guy, be the company guy, be the, you know, we know that everyone's going to hate him, the Cena sucks side, you know, when CM Punk was the saviour, the voice of the voiceless, doing everything to get himself over. John Cena played his role in that just as well as CM Punk did to get CM Punk over to that next level. And for me personally, that's certainly one of my favourite John Cena rivalries. Like I said, there's so many, there's probably many that I've not even mentioned, but let me know some of your favourites in the comments below. Gonna combine the next two questions into one. We've got Anthony new in house saying, what are 5 dream opponents for John Cena? And we've got the NWC show saying, John Cena versus who you would have loved to see him in the ring with. And for the NWC show, it would have been a prime Bret Hart or ravishing Rick Rude. Couple of great choices there. I love the idea of Bret the Hitman Hart, particularly one of my favourites growing up, and of course it's a match we never got to see, sadly. Like I say, a prime Bret Hart in that position would be really, really good. Of course, John Cena and Bret Hart were friends in 2012 as well, when Bret made his return to WWE, so certainly that will be one of the 5 that I'm going to select. Of course, you've got to go with some of the biggest matches possible that we never got to see with John Cena, the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Could you imagine them in their prime against each other? That is a WrestleMania main event in itself. The same with Hulk Hogan as well. You know, say what you want about Hogan, but certainly I think that would be a dream match environment. Goldberg would be another one for me, obviously, as well. Potentially, you still could do that match now, although personally, I think it's better when these superstars are in their prime. Personally, of course, remember back in 2003, John Cena was on SmackDown and Goldberg was on Raw, and for me to have this as a proper dream match opponent, you'd have to have it as like Super Cena, the level of John Cena where he was at in his prime, say 2007, 2008, and perhaps Goldberg, perhaps his hottest streak was probably 1998, that sort of head-to-head collision would be pretty darn awesome to see. The last choice I'm going to make for you is something a bit outside the box. I'm going to say Kenny Omega, just purely because, well, Kenny Omega's never been in WWE, and, well, John Cena's not going to go to AEW, so for me, that would be a really fun dream match to see. It was a flip between Kenny Omega and, of course, Kazuchika Okada as well. Of course, the Rainmaker is like the John Cena of New Japan Pro Wrestling as well, so, I mean, either of those would be quite fun to throw in that environment as well. Just before I move on to the next question, just in case you're wondering as well, maybe 5 opponents I'd like to see John Cena have with the current crop of today in WWE. There are a few that I still would like Cena to face in the modern era, perhaps maybe to put some of those people over as well. Theory is one that I want to see. Gunther is one I would love to see as well. Just Cena and Gunther, just, you know, slapping meat, I think would be quite fun. I'd also say Max Dupree, just to see like them have a mic battle in the ring. I think that would be quite fun just in itself. And from NXT as well, obviously the stars of tomorrow, Bron Breakker and Carmelo Hayes, I think would be 2 fantastic matchups as well for Big Match John. Next question come from NX Steve. What was the biggest booking mistake made with John Cena in your opinion? For Silk, it was having him beat all of the Nexus. Proposing to Nikki Bella at WrestleMania 33? Sorry, John. Yeah, sorry, Nikki as well. I mean, thankfully both have moved on. Hopefully that's a sore topic for either of them. But no, to be fair, on actual wrestling booking point of view, I'm going to have to agree with you. I think the Nexus is definitely the biggest mistake, because this new group that come in, we had the, you know, NXT, what it was based off, this sort of series show, all of them coming in, destroying Monday Night Raw was the big angle of the summer, of course, back in 2010. Got them to SummerSlam. It made perfect sense here for the Nexus to go over. And like you say, John Cena just wiped the floor with a lot of them with his team, and arguably as well for the rest of the feud after that. Nexus never really recovered to the point that they broke up as a group. We had CM Punk then lead the Nexus after that, and of course then we had the Core. Who remembers the Core on SmackDown back in the day? I think the only saving grace from it is that, I mean, where none of them ever recovered from it, you know, none of them became top stars. Like I said earlier in the video, John Cena sort of had to recover at one point where he was going to be fired, managed to break his way through, then managed to become a top guy. If you're going to be a top guy, you make it in the end. Obviously, arguably one of the members of the original Nexus, Daniel Bryan, being the only one that actually did so, even though he was fired after night 1 of that entire beatdown on Monday Night Raw. But of course, when he was rehired, he then was not in the Nexus. In fact, he was actually the last member that joined Team Cena at that SummerSlam. In my opinion, Wade Barrett should have been the first ever UK WWE champion, but that certainly wasn't the case in the end. And yeah, I think that led to some of the booking mistakes that was done around with the Nexus at that time. So Silk, gonna have to agree with you on that one. Next question come from Mike, Italian Habs Mike, saying, talked for years was should WWE had turned Cena heel. He feels that they should have done so at SummerSlam 2013. If I was in charge, how would I book the Cena heel turn that would have been up there with the Hogan heel turn, which would have made WWE interesting? Well, this is a very interesting question, Mike. Thank you very much for this one. SummerSlam 2013, an interesting time you have selected there. Of course, that was when Cena was going against Daniel Bryan at the time, and Daniel Bryan won the WWE Championship, and then, of course, Triple H pedigreed him, and then Randy Orton cashed in Money in the Bank, and, of course, that's when we got the start of the Authority storyline. Imagine if John Cena had been the one in Randy Orton's place and then had actually joined the Authority. That would have been a very interesting twist and idea, so I quite like that. But I would go with a different time period personally. I feel the perfect time was after WrestleMania 28. Once in a lifetime, losing that match against The Rock. You know, you see the pictures as WrestleMania was going off the air, Cena sitting in the aisleway looking, you know, distraught by the fact that he had lost that match. And of course, then after that, he went on to have the match with Brock Lesnar, who returned, and then he beat Lesnar at Extreme Rules, which still to this day, one of the more baffling John Cena victories in WWE history, in my personal opinion. I think Brock Lesnar should have also won the match. Cena, for me, should have gone on a downward spiral. He was going on a bit of a losing streak. Of course, he then went on to have main event matches with John Laurinaitis, which he lost that match as well. Of course, the Big Show being the cost of it led on to another match there. But you see the pattern I'm going through. I think John Cena should have gone through where he was losing matches, and almost to the point that he lost faith and ability in himself, because you go back then to a few months earlier, and of course the feud with CM Punk, John Cena become everything he hated. He become the corporation, become the establishment, and perhaps maybe he wasn't super senior anymore. He wasn't believing into his own hype. And I think that's how we could have started to get there, because where Cena can't get the job done, maybe dirty tactics is the starting trick to try and get John Cena there, but maybe it's not quite working. He's still losing matches. That's where you can get the John Cena stable in, someone that actually watches back. You know, there were rumors that he should have had that NWO type stable, and of course I will still always remember the idea of John Cena and that NWO style t-shirt, of course, during the Fly Fight Funhouse match with Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania 36. Of course, the Performance Center highlight for me over that WrestleMania weekend, along with the Boneyard match with Undertaker and AJ Styles. But yeah, for me, that had a lot of imagery that sort of, you know, maybe John Cena was a politica backstage at one point. Maybe that was the idea, of should have perhaps maybe have done this idea, done this group, a lot of that sort of ideologies that were put forward, and maybe that would have been quite fun. Maybe we could have seen some established stars that were on the rise that could have watched John Cena's back, maybe a likes of a Dolph Ziggler, maybe someone like a Cody Rhodes at that sort of time. Maybe would have been perfect to have been alongside a John Cena in this type of stable, someone that could have kept John on top, but also bringing two stars up with him that maybe could have been two future main event stars when they broke away from John Cena, say a year or so later down the line. And then when we could have got into WrestleMania 29, where it would have perhaps made sense to do twice of a lifetime, John Cena looking to get that revenge. You know, it wasn't just, you know, that dynamic of I'm the babyface going to right the wrong. It could have been the heel that's like, I'm going to get this right because I'm going to do what I need to get the job done. And this also is my answer then for what is Ed Fry's question: what is the biggest missed opportunities with John Cena in his career? For me, it is not turning him heel, when I think certainly a lot of fans were turning on John Cena around that time period. Of course, especially look at John Cena was still main eventing shows, even though CM Punk was the champion. People were sick of Cena being shoved down their throats, and of course, if you'd have carried on with that story and turned him heel, I think it would have become very interesting very quickly for John Cena and a complete new direction. I understand it was the top merch seller, I understand everything else, but certainly it just would have been a change of pace. Even if you change Cena back to being a babyface a year or two down the line later, I think fans then would have been more accepting and would have felt fresh with Cena's character than when he'd gone back to being a babyface further down the line. Speaking of WrestleMania 29, the next question comes from the kid, Mikey Wilkes. In your opinion, would it have made sense to include CM Punk in the WrestleMania 29 main event with The Rock and John Cena? 100%. CM Punk should have been in the main event of WrestleMania 29. I know we had the match of the night against The Undertaker, take that aside, but there were some true, genuine things that were being said on the mic around that time. CM Punk was disillusioned that he was not in WrestleMania that year. It was his time, it was his turn. I think many people would accept that WrestleMania 28, the time we had The Rock and John Cena as that once-in-a-lifetime match, even though CM Punk was the WWE champion, I think people would have forgiven that he wasn't the main event of that show on that night. But following that, CM Punk carried the championship all the way to the Royal Rumble. Obviously, had the feud going on with The Rock that started, you know, with that Raw 1000, obviously after John Cena had the failed cash-in with the Money in the Bank attempt as well. So that would have made a perfect sense to have started that storyline to go forward with those guys towards WrestleMania 29. But as I say, CM Punk, he carried the belt all the way to the Royal Rumble, 434 days, lost it at the final hurdle. The Rock wins the championship. Predictably, Cena wins the Royal Rumble, and we got to see a match of WrestleMania that at this time everyone went, don't know if I want to see this again. It was supposed to be once in a lifetime, and I think a lot of the reasons people didn't necessarily want to see it again was because everyone knew that John Cena was going to get his win back. It felt very predictable of what we were going to get this time around at WrestleMania in that main event. But if you added CM Punk into the mix, anything could have happened. There would have been lots of different dynamics of what they could have done. I know they had a one-on-one match at one point as well, on I think it was a February edition of Raw, which I think CM Punk had won. I think he could have got himself involved towards that WrestleMania match. Big mistake that it was just Cena versus The Rock, in my opinion. CM Punk should have been a part of it. The triple threat match made most sense. CM Punk would have had a WrestleMania main event to his name. Hey, who knows? Maybe he wouldn't have walked out in 2014. We'll never know. But one thing's for sure, I certainly would have had it as the triple threat. Next question coming from Bama Dave. Now, I'm not going to show you on screen, but he did ask me how I'd book John Cena's retirement match. Now, I'll give you Bama Dave's idea quickly. He proposed to me as well. He proposed that we'd have John Cena versus Randy Orton at WrestleMania 40 for the vacated WWE World Universal Championship. And he'd have actually Randy Orton win that match, which would stop John Cena, of course, winning the 17th World title. And we would then also get Cena versus Randy Orton one-on-one at a WrestleMania. I think it's a fun idea. I think it's a creative idea. For me personally, what I would do, this is just me, I would have John Cena win the 17th World title and, you know, celebrate this big landmark magical moment, and I would have a Money in the Bank cash-in. I would have Theory as your Money in the Bank holder. Now let's not forget, if the rumors are true, Theory versus John Cena at SummerSlam can be part 1 of this. I would make it as a theme to get Theory to be that next megastar at the expense of the name of John Cena. So when John Cena wins that 17th world title, he is cashed in on by Theory. It goes for the rematch, perhaps he loses the rematch, and if he can't get the job the following time after Theory's shenanigans, whatever you want, to escape and get away with the title, he puts his career on the line, because it's the only way that Theory will face him one more time. And of course then Theory would be the man to retire John Cena, not only beating John Cena when he became the 17th world title to then become the champion, say, for the first time, but also then getting to retire John Cena. That would make a brand new megastar out of Theory instantly. So for me, my job for that simply is to make a brand new star using the star power of one John Cena. Ed Fries of our next few questions now for us now. I'm going to start off now. Would John Cena have worked in any other eras of wrestling? Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. I mean, John Cena went through 20 years worth of WWE programming on top there. Obviously, as soon as the Dr. Thugonomics character started in Ruthless Aggression, if that character had been in the Attitude Era, would have been no problem. John Cena, Big Match John that we've had as well, the Golden Era, there's no doubt, whether you love him or hate him, John Cena would work in any era of WWE, and I think still would for years to come, because even with his return last year at Money in the Bank, fans were still going wild for him. I think the crowd is going to be hot for him in Laredo, Texas tomorrow night. So let's see what's going to happen going forward. But for me, yeah, I think John Cena works in any era of wrestling. Ed Fry's next question is, John Cena the GOAT for the Massachusetts wrestling crop? Undoubtedly. If there's been a wrestling fan that's only been following for 20 years now, John Cena is going to be on their Mount Rushmore of every wrestler of any town, any country, any generation. For older school fans, John Cena may be in the top 5, the top 10, something like that. If you're not a fan of him, think Cena sucks, maybe he might be quite the way down. But like I say, you can't deny the guy's influence of what he's done for the wrestling industry. And personally for me, like I say, he's definitely top 10 of all time in my personal opinion. So yeah, I mean, there have been times that I've not been a fan of John Cena, by the way. I have been a bit bored of his era, like I said there, around the sort of 2010 to 2014 sort of time, up until we became United States champion, I think in 2015. That's when I kind of got back on side with what was going on with John Cena. But you can't deny what the guy has done for the industry. He's definitely the top of the crop when it comes to Massachusetts. Which arguably could play into your next question as well, discussion on where Cena ranks from the epic OVW class with Rico, the world's greatest tag team, Shelton Benjamin, Charlie Haas, Randy Orton, and Brock Lesnar. Of course, another name for that as well would be Dave Bautista as well. Of course, 2002, a great year of producing such great talents in the wrestling industry, as you said there. John Cena is probably going to rank amongst the top there. I mean, obviously, Randy Orton is still going today. Obviously, he's been a multi-time world champion. But when they were around at the same time, John Cena was pushed as the number 1. Randy Orton was pushed as the number 2. Obviously, Rico was greatest tag team in ring, fantastic workers, but never did become world champion status. When it comes to Brock Lesnar and Dave Bautista, I mean, Dave Bautista again was underneath John Cena, probably in the pecking order, probably number 2 or number 3, depending on where you feel with Randy Orton. Brock Lesnar is the interesting one, because Brock Lesnar, had he not left in 2004, we would never know if Brock would have been pushed as the number 1 of those two. I think that there's an argument that Brock would have done, because he was hot-shotted straight into the main event, straight in SummerSlam 2002, was the first of all them to become a world champion. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe John Cena is 3rd of that lineup to become a world champion. Of course, Randy Orton was the 2nd at SummerSlam 2004. At that point was the youngest world heavyweight champion. John Cena, of course, WrestleMania 21 was the match earlier than when Batista defeated Triple H, of course, becoming the last of the 4 world champions of the 2002 crop. But for me, as I've said already, in-ring popularity, whatever you want, you may say that a superstar is better here or there, but when it comes to buy rates, being top merchandise, being the draw, I don't think there's any argument. John Cena is the number 1, carried WWE for a long period of time through ratings. Yes, ratings have declined over the years and stuff like that. And of course, Brock Lesnar has been back since 2012. Actually threw John Cena out of the main event, you could argue, back in 2014. But John Cena at that point had been the main event for near enough a decade. You can argue Brock Lesnar has been main event since, but he is a part-timer, always has been, comes in here and there when WWE needs him to do so. And when John Cena returns now, where is he? same thing as a part-timer. Yep, he's in and around that main event area, even if it's less frequent than what perhaps it would be with some of the others. But Randy Orton's the consistent, is the one that's still going. Maybe in time you could turn around and say that maybe he would be the one that could challenge Cena for that. But as I say, Cena's been the one that's been at #1. So yeah, I think same with Massachusetts. It's the same with the Mount Rushmore answer. I think a lot of people would turn to Cena unless you're in the Cena sucks category. Last question this week comes from WrestleMania. Gonna need to know your favourite track from this masterpiece, of course, the John Cena album. Now, I'm gonna have to be honest with you, I can't say I've owned this album or have even listened to it that much. So I had a little bit of a listen on Spotify to refresh my memory with this one, and look, I'm gonna have to be honest, it's gonna have to beat The Time Is Now, the actual John Cena theme song, because well, it's iconic. We've been hearing it for however many years now as the entrance, and of course as soon as you hear that start of it, you know John Cena's coming through the curtain, you know there's going to be energy, electricity. It's a big part of what, you know, brings John Cena into the ring. And of course, let's not forget as well the famous Aussie radio prank phone call as well, that's including that theme song as well. So yeah, I'm gonna have to pick that one if I'm honest with you. Big thank you to everyone for your questions. That has been Ask SCW, the John Cena edition for you there. If you want to be involved on the next Q&A, we'll go back to the regular format for you next week. Of course, questions with WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, you name it, you can get involved. Drop a question in the comments below. Leave the hashtag AskSCW with your question. I'll give you a shout out as well in the next video. You can also follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as well. All are coming on your screen right about now. If you've enjoyed this video, then I please do encourage you to like the video as well, share it with a friend, and subscribe to SCW. Keep an eye out as more videos are dropping on the channel. It is Money in the Bank week coming up here on SCW. Predictions will be on the way, as well as a couple of collaborations as well, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Speaking of collaborations, I was very fortunate as well to go on the NWC show, of course, formerly Non-Stop Wrestling Chat. The NWC show, of course, This Week in Wrestling, episode 80, is on his channel right now, which I'll be attaching at the end of this video very shortly. And one last request from me as well, if you've enjoyed this video of being a themed Q&A, then let me know in the comments below. It's been a lot of fun to do this, so if you want to see more themed Q&As as well in future weeks, then let me know and maybe we can do something like this a bit more regular on the channel. But that's all from me anyway. Thank you for watching. Have yourselves a great day. You've been watching SCW here on YouTube. Check out the videos on the side of your screen right now. Take care, enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you next time.